How do we publish a Dockerized application as an Azure app? In this Docker tutorial, we are going to create a Python-based flask service. We are going to Dockerize that, and finally we will deploy that Dockerized application in Azure. Consider subscribing to my channel to get more videos like this. Without further ado, let us jump into the video now. As a first step, we'll be creating our Python-based Flask application. We are going to build a very simple Hello World Python-based Flask application. And I have already created that application, and currently that project is opened in my Visual Studio Code. Let us now review the project. So there are a couple of project artifacts. We are going to cover each of them briefly. First, let us talk about the requirements.txt. Requirements.txt has got all the dependency information inside that. This will be used by the Python's packaging manager or pip to download those resources from the internet. So in our case, we have dependency on the Flask library. So we have it defined inside the requirements.txt. Let us go into the Hello World service py file, which is the core Python file which handles requests from the outside world. It's going to prepare the response. It's going to send it back. In our case, we are going to have a single service. It's whenever a request comes to /hello world, this service is going to handle the request and it's going to send a JSON payload as a response. The Hello World service py file uses the Flask library to handle all the requests. Let me put it like this. And finally, let us talk about the Docker file. The Docker file contains all the instructions that are required to build a Docker image. So Docker file is the prereq to build a Docker image. We put it in a very simple words. So every Docker file has got or is built out of a base image. In our case, we want to have our Docker image based out of Python and the specific tag. For additional information, please go into DockerHub official documentation of the images and you can get more details. Then we want to have the dependencies installed using the pip, the packaging manager of Python, and we are going to deploy the Hello World service py. Finally, we will be starting the service, the Hello World service, which will be listening on port 8000. So this is a very high level overview of the Docker file. Let us first test this service locally before we build the Docker image. So I have already started the service which is listening on port 5000. I'm going to start an instance, browser instance, and let me just pop in. Sorry, we need to provide /hello world. And here we go. This is the JSON payload response we have. So we have completed the step 1. Next step is we will have to build our Docker image. As a next step, we will be building our Docker image. If you are a Mac user, you have to make sure that this setting within the Docker desktop is enabled. I'm going to open the Docker desktop settings and let me just highlight this. This settings, we have to make sure it is enabled. If we don't enable that, when we run a Docker build within Mac, it is going to generate a Docker image which is compatible only with ARM64. But if you're going to enable this, then the Docker image is compatible with x86 64, AMD 64, and when that image gets deployed in Azure, it works. So make sure that this settings is enabled, and once we have that settings enabled, we are going to head down to the terminal and we are going to issue the docker build command. We will have to say what is the image name. So I'm going to give the complete path of the image, because finally we want to push this image back to the DockerHub. So it should be, let's say, the username slash what is the repository name that we want to give. Let's say in this case, let us give Python hello world service, and let us make this latest, and we have to give the file name of the Docker file. Since I have not used the default naming convention, I have to provide the exact file name, and the context is the current directory. So let us issue this. It has created the image within the local registry. So the image is built, and this is the image name. So let us test this out before we push this Docker image into the DockerHub. How do we do that? So we have to use Docker run, and we have to provide the name of the container. If you don't give it, it generates a default name, rubbish name, and it doesn't make any sense. So I'm just going to give the container name as C1, and I'm going to give we want to publish this service to the outside world. So which means that whenever a request comes in, let's say 8080 on my laptop, it gets mapped to 8000 on the service which is running inside the container, and we want to run it in a detached mode because we don't want the terminal to get blocked. And finally, we will have to provide the image name, and we're going to say latest. So now the image is built and it is ready. Now we have created a container, and when we issue Docker PS, we know there is a container running, C1 running, which is listening on port 8000. Awesome. So how do we test this out? So let us open a browser, and we're going to say HTTP localhost 8080, and we're going to say hello world. Wonderful. Now things are working beautifully. We are able to test it out. The Docker image is there. Now the next step is we want to push this Docker image to the DockerHub. This Docker image we have created is currently residing in our local registry. Now we need to use the Docker push command to push this Docker image to the DockerHub, so that we can use that image to publish it in the Azure app. So let us first push the Docker image to the DockerHub. So just copy this image name, and the tag is latest. We're going to push it. Yeah, it is done. So when we go back to the DockerHub, and if I go into the repositories, there we go. So here we have our Docker image, the hello world service based on Python. That image is Dockerized, and it is available in the DockerHub. I'm really excited. The next step is we will have to publish this Dockerized application as an Azure app. Let us do that next. Now we have reached the meat and potatoes of this video, wherein we are going to take the Dockerized application, which is there in the DockerHub. We are going to publish that as an Azure web app, for which, first of all, we need to have an active subscription with the Microsoft Azure Cloud. If you don't have it, please make sure you are getting an active subscription. Then you could continue with this demo. If you already have it, awesome. Let's just continue with that. So now we are going to create our Azure web app. So go into the app services, click on web app. I'm going to create a new resource group for managing the resources. At the same time, whenever this demo is done, I would like to delete this resource group so that we don't incur any cost because of the usage. So I'm just going to use demo, let's say YouTube RG is the resource group, and let's say we name it as hello demo hello world service. I'm just going to give some fictitious name, and we're going to deploy a container. Operating system is Linux, and pricing plans. I'm just going to leave all these things default. So we don't have any databases. We want to deploy containers. It's not a sidecar container. It's not a helper container. And the image source is a DockerHub. It is a single container, and we want to deploy our image, whatever we created it. So just copy it from the Docker Hub. I just copied the image name, and the version we are going to give is latest. And go into networking. We are going to leave all these things default. Go into monitor and secure, and let's go into tags. Nothing great. So let us review and click on create. Good. So this will take a couple of minutes. I'm going to pause this video for a few minutes now. So now we have our resource created. The web app is created. Now I'm going to copy this URL. I'm going to copy this URL window, and just going to view HTTPS, and our service is hello world, and hit on it. Yes, we got the response. Awesome. Now we have demonstrated how do we dockerize an application, and finally that dockerized application is deployed as an Azure web app. Please try this Docker tutorial at your home. If you have any questions, any feedback, please share your comments in the text box below. Thank you so much for watching this video.